When we look back into the early centuries of Islamic expansion, we often think of Damascus, Baghdad, and the deserts of Arabia, of powerful caliphs, wise scholars, and distant conquests. But far away from those heartlands, on the edges of the known world, lay a province that stood quietly between two civilizations. Sindh, the frontier between the great empire of the Abbasids and the mysterious lands beyond the Indus. It was here, in this distant corner of the Muslim world, that faith, politics, and geography met in ways few people remember today. This is the story of the early Muslim governors of Sindh, men who carried the banner of Baghdad to the edge of India and who struggled to keep it flying in a land that was both strange and ancient. When Muhammad bin Qasim first conquered Sindh in 712 CE under the Umayyads, he planted the first seeds of Islamic rule in the region. But after his sudden recall and execution, the rule of the Arabs in Sindh wavered. The empire changed hands, the Umayyads fell, and the Abbasids rose in 750 CE, bringing a new vision, one of centralization, scholarship, and a vast network of governors appointed from Baghdad itself. Sindh, though distant and difficult to manage, was part of this vision. The early Abbasid caliphs saw it not just as a conquered land, but as a frontier, a testing ground for faith, diplomacy, and power. Imagine for a moment how far Sindh was from Baghdad. Thousands of kilometers of deserts, rivers, and mountains lay in between. Messages could take months to arrive. Governors ruled without immediate supervision, often relying on their own judgment. This distance created both opportunity and danger. It gave them freedom to act, but also exposed them to rebellion, corruption, and isolation. The men sent from Baghdad were not only administrators, they were ambassadors of a new civilization trying to take root in an old one. The early Abbasid governors of Sindh inherited a complex situation. The people of Sindh, Hindus, Buddhists, and Jats, had lived under local traditions for centuries. Many of them still remembered the days of Raja Dahir and the fall of his kingdom. Temples stood beside mosques, and older laws often continued under new names. The Abbasid governors understood that to survive here, they needed more than soldiers. They needed diplomacy, patience, and a respect for local customs. In many ways, Sindh became a laboratory of coexistence long before the word existed. One of the first Abbasid governors of Sindh was Hakam ibn Awana al-Kalbi. Appointed by Caliph al-Mansur in the mid-8th century, he sought to strengthen control over this faraway province. He faced two main challenges: external threats from the Rajput kingdoms beyond the Indus, and internal unrest among local chiefs who had accepted Arab rule only in name. Hakam tried to build bridges, literally and metaphorically. He fortified key cities like Mansoura, which became the new capital of Arab Sindh, and encouraged trade between the Indus Valley and the Arabian Gulf. Through these networks, Sindh's goods, rice, textiles, and spices began to find their way to Basra and Baghdad. But Sindh was never an easy land to rule. Its geography was as complicated as its politics. The Indus River shifted its course often, cutting off villages, changing trade routes, and creating new islands of settlement. Governors had to balance the demands of Baghdad with the realities on the ground. Collecting taxes in such a diverse and scattered land was never simple, and every governor who failed to send sufficient revenue back to Baghdad risked losing his position, or worse. Another notable figure was Daud ibn Yazid, who ruled during the time of Caliph al-Mahdi. His tenure was marked by a delicate balance between enforcing Abbasid authority and maintaining peace with the local population. The Abbasids were deeply aware that Sindh was a borderland. Beyond it lay the powerful Hindu kingdoms of northern India. Open hostility with them could draw the empire into endless wars. So Dodd maintained diplomatic contacts, sometimes exchanging envoys, sometimes even arranging marriages or trade pacts. These were not mere political maneuvers, they were survival strategies. The Abbasid administration also brought changes in language and learning. Arabic began to mix with the local dialects. The new rulers recorded taxes and legal judgments in Arabic, but local scribes often translated these into Sindhi or Sanskrit for the people. Over time, a hybrid administrative culture emerged. Mosques stood beside temples, and the call to prayer mingled with the sound of bells and chants from the old faiths. It was a complex, sometimes tense, but often peaceful coexistence. And yet, not all was calm. The distance from Baghdad meant that governors were tempted to act independently. Some grew ambitious and dreamed of autonomy. One such figure was Umar ibn Hafs Hazarmard, who ruled Sindh in the early 9th century. He tried to consolidate power by marrying into local families and recruiting Sindhi soldiers into his army. For a while, his plan worked. Mansoura prospered, trade flourished, and local elites began to accept Arab authority more genuinely. But with power came suspicion. When reports reached Baghdad that Umar ibn Hafs was acting like a king rather than a governor, the caliph sent an army to remove him. He was replaced, and the lesson was clear. Sindh might be far away, but Baghdad's eyes were always watching. Still, it was not easy for the caliphs to maintain direct control. The Abbasid Empire stretched from the Atlantic to the borders of China, and in that vastness, Sindh was but a small, distant province. The flow of gold, soldiers, and officials from the center could not reach it easily. Gradually, power in Sindh began to localize. Arab families who had settled there for generations became the new aristocracy. They intermarried with locals, adopted local customs, and spoke the Sindhi language alongside Arabic. For them, Sindh was no longer a frontier, it was home. By the mid-9th century, the Abbasid hold over Sindh weakened further. The caliphs in Baghdad faced revolts in other parts of their empire, especially in Persia and Central Asia. Governors of Sindh, sensing the empire's distraction, began to act as semi-independent rulers. Some even stopped sending regular tribute. The most prominent of these autonomous dynasties were the Abbasids, who ruled Sindh from around 854 CE. Though they nominally accepted the Abbasid caliph's authority, in practice they governed independently from Mansoura. Their coins carried the caliph's name, but their policies were their own. Under the Abbasids, Sindh entered a new era of stability and identity. They continued the Islamic traditions established earlier, but allowed local culture to thrive. The region became a blend of Arab administration and Indian heritage. Scholars from Basra visited Mansoura and noted how the Arabic of Sindh had its own accent, shaped by the rhythm of the Indus Valley. Markets overflowed with goods from across the Indian Ocean, while the mosques of Mansoura echoed with prayers spoken in both Arabic and Sindhi. Through these early governors and rulers, Islam slowly transformed from a foreign faith into a local one. The mosques built by the Arabs were often decorated with local patterns. The clothing of the governors mixed Arab robes with Sindhi embroidery, and gradually the two worlds began to merge, not by decree, but by the slow current of time. Still, the connection with Baghdad never disappeared completely. Even in their semi-independence, the governors of Sindh would send gifts and letters to the caliphs, seeking recognition and legitimacy. For them, to be part of the Abbasid world was to belong to something vast and glorious, a civilization that connected the deserts of Arabia with the deltas of the Indus. But at the same time, they understood that survival required local wisdom. They could not govern by force alone. They had to listen, adapt, and respect the diversity of their land. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period is how trade shaped governance. The ports of Sindh, Dabal, Debul, and later Thatta became lifelines for commerce between India, Arabia, and East Africa. Governors who maintained peace and order in these ports brought wealth to their cities. Merchants, both Muslim and Hindu, worked side by side. Their ships carried silk, spices, and gems to faraway lands. Sindh, once a remote province, became a crucial node in the Indian Ocean trade network. The governors also had to manage relations with the tribes of the frontier, the Meds, the Jats, and the Rajputs. These groups were powerful, mobile, and often resistant to centralized control. Some governors tried to subdue them through military campaigns. Others chose alliances and marriages. The frontier was never static. It was a zone of negotiation where diplomacy and warfare existed side by side. Life in the cities of Arab Sindh reflected this blending of worlds. In Mansoura, one could hear the recitation of Arabic poetry, the hum of Sanskrit chants, and the chatter of traders in Sindhi. The Friday sermons praised the Abbasid Caliph, but the everyday life of the people remained rooted in their local traditions. The dress, food, and festivals of Sindh showed an early form of cultural synthesis, a glimpse of what South Asian Islam would later become. As the centuries passed, the Abbasid Caliphate itself began to fragment. By the 10th century, new powers rose in Persia and Central Asia, the Saffarids, the Samanids, and later the Ghaznavids. Sindh, too, entered a new chapter. The Habarids continued for some time, but their influence waned as regional politics shifted. Yet the legacy of those early Abbasid governors remained. They had laid the foundations of governance, faith, and coexistence that would shape Sindh for centuries to come. Their rule also left behind physical traces. The ruins of Mansoura, for example, still whisper stories of that time. Archaeologists have found coins bearing both Arabic inscriptions and local motifs, fragments of pottery with designs that show both Arab and Indian styles. In those ruins, one can almost hear the echo of the muezzin's call mingling with the songs of the river. What makes this chapter of history so fascinating is how forgotten it has become. The great empires of India, the Mughals, the Delhi Sultanate, the British Raj, often overshadow the earlier centuries. But long before Delhi rose, long before Lahore flourished, Sindh had already been a meeting point of civilizations. The early governors of Sindh were not just administrators of a distant province, they were bridges between two worlds, between Baghdad and the Indus, between Arabia and India, between the desert and the river. They faced enormous challenges, rebellion, isolation, cultural differences, yet they managed to keep a fragile order alive. In doing so, they ensured that the Indus Valley remained connected to the broader Islamic world. From their efforts came the slow but steady growth of Islam in South Asia, not as a foreign force, but as a living local faith. As centuries turned, Sindh would continue to evolve through the Sumras, the Samas, and later the Arghans and Mughals. But the roots of its Islamic identity began here, in those first generations after the conquest, under the governors who carried Baghdad's authority in one hand and the trust of the Sindhi people in the other. And so, as we look back at this forgotten chapter of history, we must ask ourselves, how did these early governors manage to rule such a diverse land from so far away? How did they balance faith and pragmatism, loyalty and independence, Arab ideals and Indian realities? The story of the early Muslim governors of Sindh is not only a tale of conquest, it is a story of adaptation, coexistence, and human endurance. It reminds us that history is not made by empires alone, but by the countless men and women who live at their edges, who build bridges between worlds rather than walls between them. And when we think of Sindh today, its music, its poetry, its gentle spirituality, can we not still feel the distant echo of that meeting between Baghdad and the Indus? That ancient dialogue of faith and culture, which in many ways never truly ended? So, what do you think? Do forgotten chapters like these still matter to us today? Do they still whisper lessons about coexistence, tolerance, and understanding in our modern world? Or have we, in chasing grander histories, allowed these quieter stories to fade away, perhaps when we need them the most?